There's a race happening across the world. This urgency is greatest in the Asia-Pacific, where deforestation, hunting and urban development are destroying the natural world and all its unique inhabitants. A race against time to save our last wild places. This is RangerStations, a fresh new look at wildlife conservation, happening here and now.
Not every ranger station is located in the heart of a jungle, although some might think of this as a kind of a jungle. But anyway, you'd be surprised how many conservation projects are located close to civilization these days. But with the urban jungle encroaching into wilderness areas at an alarming rate, this really shouldn't come as much of a surprise either. Our field station this week is in Sri Lanka, in the northeast of the island. Now, although the region is home to a diversity of wildlife and habitats, we're headed for the ancient city of Polonnaruwa. Now, the whole area there is scattered with ruins, which give clues to the city's rich 1,000-year-old history, when it was the royal capital of Sri Lanka.
What's left today are nevertheless spectacular remains of a fabulous garden city that was once the seat of power for the entire island. Over 1,000 years ago, Sri Lanka underwent a huge technological revolution. The kings of the time discovered the power of water, how to direct it and how to contain it, even in the driest seasons. They built huge irrigation systems and artificial lakes, called tanks, and brought life to some of the harshest regions of the island.
Water has always been a deciding factor for human civilization, and wherever humans go, you will be sure that an entire entourage of very adaptable animals will be following close behind.
An abundance of water provides a lifeline for agriculture and animal husbandry. And in Polonnaruwa, pigs are not the only ones to benefit from the bounty of the land. Flocks of crows and giant monitor lizards are quick to clean up after the human residents of the area. It's a free-for-all. Unlike the domesticated animals here, these water monitors are extremely wild, and yet they've changed their entire feeding strategy to reap this unlikely harvest. But there are others here that have come out of the forest and followed humans into the urban wilderness. These are Toque Macaques, a species of primate unique to the island. Unfortunately, these individuals are captives, used for street entertainment or trained to pick fruit. But their wild cousins still retain the fire that these have lost. On the back roads of Polonnaruwa, entire clans of these macaques gather in bold raiding parties, scouting the area for likely food sources. They are risk takers, but it's been these gambles that have paid off for the species as a whole. And today, we'll be telling their story. A story that reflects something of our own origins. Primates today exhibit a set of traits and behaviors that may closely resemble our own ancestors. But to explain this in a little more detail, I've got to get a little closer to one of the most familiar members of this very successful family. Now, one of the most familiar members are these guys.
the long-tailed macaque. Although the toques and these monkeys are separate species, they do share some traits in common. What I'm trying to do is get close to this troop. It's late in the afternoon, the worst of the sun has gone, so what they're doing now is just spending their time relaxing, grooming and foraging on the ground. Now, interestingly enough, what we have here is not a forest, it's abandoned cultivation. Wherever you go throughout the region and you find macaques, you'll find them even in urban areas, and that's because they have a very unfussy diet. They can make a meal of almost anything. Now, something that all macaque species share in common is their strong social bond. They work as a team, as a small community. They share their food, they make sure that each one of them is protected if they're healthy or even if they're ill. You see that big individual walking past me? That guy there, looking very respectable, very regal? That's the dominant male of the troop. As long as he's around, keeping an eye on things, the rest of the troop will be very relaxed. As you can see here, a lot of the other troop individuals are taking their cue from the male. If he decides to move on a few feet, the rest of them will slowly graduate towards that area. Now, the dominant male is very possessive of his females. A large percentage of the troop will be made up by adult and immature females. And a lot of the babies that you see running around, and you can hear up there, are all his offspring. So he's got a lot of good reasons to protect this troop from any outsiders. If there's any member of the natural world who could put up with this continuous encroachment by the human species, I can tell you, these macaques will be sticking to us like glue for as long as we're around. And why is that? Well, simply because they're eternal opportunists, which calls to mind our own ancestors who used this very same trait to survive and prosper. But this is not a story about the past. In northern Sri Lanka, there's a man who's been studying and trying to conserve a unique species of primate, whose social structure and survival strategies are giving us a unique insight into how it all may have begun.
The Toque Macaques take their name from the unique hairdos that each of them wear. These hairstyles are determined at birth and are so unique that they serve as a distinct identification for each individual, much like fingerprints define each human being. Dr. Wolfgang Dittus, a primatologist, has been studying the species here in Polonnaruwa for over 30 years. Since his arrival, he's revolutionized the way we think about monkey society. He's opened up a world where family ties and friendships can make the difference between survival and death. The macaques are not the only primates living in the forests and temple ruins of Polonnaruwa. They share the habitat with grey langurs, a much larger species of monkey which also has very strong family bonds. The two species are able to coexist because the langurs are specialist leaf eaters and not as versatile in their diets as the macaques. Although the species do come into contact with each other, it's the smaller macaques that are dominant over the langurs. What they lack in size, they make up for in feisty temperaments.
If you focus on that shot long enough, you might be able to see the Toque Macaques supplanting the grey langur from its feeding spot. There's a little infant macaque right behind the langur. That infant might chase the langur off. It might not. That's a common feature in these interspecific relationships, that the macaques are ecologically dominant to the gray langurs.
When they're in the mood, macaques can make real nuisances of themselves, making threats and mock charges against outsiders. Until finally, the langurs just have enough of it and retreat out of harm's way. In fact, there are two species of langur resident here, and the far more reclusive purple-faced leaf monkey is even less forthcoming than the grey langurs. It sticks around just long enough to grab a quick meal and then disappears once more into the foliage.
Oh, it's like a solitary male langur out here, along with the macaques. He's probably been thrown out, or he's trying to make his way into another langur group.
But despite their more passive nature, teamwork still pays off for the langurs. They use the roads around Polonnaruwa as shortcuts to the best feeding places, which invariably means someone's backyard.
The gray langurs are always more numerous than the macaques because the langurs' diet depends on leaves. There are more leaves in the forest than there are fruit, so always, in most situations, there are more langurs than there are macaques.
Although raiding food from urban areas seems initially like a good idea, this is when problems start to happen. Access to human garbage has a dramatic effect on the monkeys' feeding behavior. These days, plastic bags are as much on the menu as shoots and seeds, and sights like this have become commonplace. It's a growing concern to the doctor and his team, because this increased exposure to the worst that human society has to offer is having serious consequences on the lives of the troops.
Now you'd think having your study animals living right on your doorstep would make it a little bit easier to raise awareness about them. But unfortunately these Toque Macaques, despite their uniqueness, have a very poor reputation with the locals. And Dr. Wolf is facing an uphill struggle to try and change that.
It's a threat to their survival in the sense that you're artificially feeding them. I mean, people don't think of it that way, but that's in effect what's happening. And that then stimulates population growth. In other words, more monkeys survive, more monkeys are born. And to the point where there are more monkeys in the area than the natural food resources can support. And so when the tourists aren't around, then the monkeys go into neighboring villages and they begin to raid. And then people get angry with them and they poison them, or they trap them and do some other nasty things. So the end effect of this seemingly kind act of giving food to monkeys is actually has very
vicious cycle.
Yeah, drastic consequences.
So how do you go about solving this problem? Well, top on the list of priorities is the need to raise awareness. But to do that, you've got to understand the animal you're trying to conserve. Dr. Wolf is doing just that by using a variety of field techniques to get into the mind of the Toque Macaque. Macaque society is a harsh one, made up of winners and losers, high caste and low caste. The only difference between this system and human society is that the Toques, once born into their various roles, are stuck with them for the rest of their lives. Macaques are as suspicious of outsiders as they are curious of them, so becoming a constant and accepted part of their surroundings is essential. In the field, cooperation counts just as much for the research team as it does for the Toque Macaques. Backing up Dr. Wolf is his assistant, Sunil, and a team of young researchers. Sunil knows all of the members of the M groups by name and face, and he has an uncanny ability of finding them in the bush.
You know, they're feeding on that large fruits.
Sunil's knowledge of the land is invaluable to the doctor, and the two of them are constantly updating the movements and growth of each clan.
Banti and Tutsi both are there.
Banti and Tutsi, okay. Banti book brushed up.
A little bit. Total brushed up on the top.
Identifying each member of the clan is a top priority, and the researchers use a unique system to place each individual.
That is Chamira. He's one of our field assistants. He's a trainee, and right now he's going about following individual monkeys and making identification cards so that he can come out here on a regular basis and census them. How many are living, how many are dead, who's pregnant, who's given birth, who's got a wound, and so forth. For a person to be able to do that, you need to be able to identify them as an individual macaque. So we have what's called these identification cards. This is a blank one. And then we look at the monkey, and on the card, for example, if he has an ear cut, then we would show, well, he's got a cut in the ear like here, for example, like that, if he has a cut, let's say. And if the monkey has a spot, we would indicate where in the face that spot is exactly. Let's say there's a black spot here. Put it on this side of the card also. And then we would give it a name. Like this would be, let's say we call him Zesty. In recognition of his energetic behavior, we call him Zesty. And his mother's name is probably Zip. Okay, so we keep the same family name. And these sort of markings sort of serve to identify him for life.
The most eye-opening results of his research are the incredibly rich and varied social links they have with each other, and the important roles mothers and fathers play in their rankings.
Dr. Wolfgang's studies are opening up a chapter of our own existence which has only been vaguely understood. Now, you think politics is a relatively recent phenomenon? Well, think again.
It seems that the strength of these social bonds can determine the success of an individual. In macaque society, friendship can take you places. Dr. Wolfgang is researching the possibility that politics, as we humans like to call it, developed instinctively as a survival trait in our earliest ancestors, who in many ways resembled these modern-day macaques.
These fellows are making coalitions. They're establishing friendships, and these friendships are based on family relationships and long-term grooming relationships. So basically what's happening, if one of these monkeys gets into trouble with somebody else, he screams blue murder, and he looks behind over his shoulder, looks at another fellow whose support he wants against an antagonist. He calls for his friends come, they all support him, and they chase off the aggressor.
Now this is all well and good if you're a popular macaque, but if you're not, well then the whole system can work severely against you.
Living in social groups has both its advantages and its disadvantages, its costs. Now, for the old age and for the infirm, there's definitely an advantage to living in the social group because you have the protection of the group as a whole against predators and against neighboring groups that may want to do you harm. Now we've got an old male right here. His name is Basil. He's about 27 years old, and that's pretty old for a macaque. That's about the equivalent of an 80-year-old man in human society. And his friend Ashley is sitting over there. Now, it's a sort of a double-edged sword here. These old animals, they can survive because they have the general protection of the group. But on the other hand, within the group, they're subordinate. They're sort of peripheral. You notice that they're hanging around the periphery, picking up little bits and pieces of food, while these animals in front, they're getting all the good tidbits. So, yes, they have the protection of the group. At the same time, they have a subordinate place within the society. And that occurs for males. As they get older, they have less and less status in the group.
In 30 years, Dr. Wolf has been able to gain access into macaque society, to begin to understand the importance of bonds and group relationships in an intensely social species. In that space of time, he's also documented the various and increasing threats faced by the macaques in their habitat. With their risk-taking urban lifestyle, the macaques face another major and constant threat: traffic. There's a young female kept in the doctor's backyard hospital. She's a victim of a road accident, blinded by the impact of a speeding car. As a result of her injuries, she won't be able to fend for herself in the wild ever again. As continued and constant urban growth transforms the landscape of Polonnaruwa, even the highly versatile macaques are having a tough time keeping up.
Conservation is a very important aspect of our research. Conservation issue really boils down to the preservation of habitat that these monkeys need for their survival. Preservation of habitat means natural habitat, and that brings us directly into conflict with other land use issues in the country. Agriculture, forestry, and tourism and whatnot. So what we really need to do is to be able to convince policymakers, politicians and people that the rich biological heritage in their country is worth preserving and conserving. Set aside good pieces of land so that these wild animals can live, not just monkeys. If you preserve monkey habitat, you're also preserving elephant habitat, you're also preserving habitat for a vast array of bird species. And the way that we're approaching it is to show people how close these animals are to us, how wonderful their society is, how interesting, how sophisticated these monkeys are. They deserve to have a place in our world.
Now, it's very easy to take something like macaques or apes for granted. By and large, they're quite easy to find, and anyone you pass on the street could probably tell you that they know something about them. But if you take the time to scratch beneath the surface, you'll begin to understand why macaques are so important, not just to their own habitat, but in helping us understand our role in the environment.
In the time we've spent with Dr. Wolfgang Dittus, we've had a privileged glimpse into macaque behavior and learned about the bonds that hold their community together, bonds that in a certain way still persevere in our own human society.